Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be giving you guys a quick guide on how to use the gunner in Deep Rock Galactic. The gunner is great at dealing constant and sustained damage. The gunner may not have the tools to make him as mobile as the other classes, but can excel at certain mission types like when collecting a Quarix with the use of his tools. The first primary that the gunner will have is the Lead Storm minigun. The minigun has a high fire rate and has a spin up that can take a moment before you can shoot. The minigun has a high damage output and can be used to shoot specific enemies with high damage and sustained damage. The gear modifications I suggest for the Leadstorm minigun will be improved platform stability for increased accuracy, high velocity rounds for increased damage, blow-through rounds so bullets can pass through targets, variable changer pressure for increased damage, and cold as the grave. The overclocks I suggest for the Leadstorm will be the clean overclock, a little more oomph, for increased damage and faster spin up. The next overclock I would suggest would be the unstable overclock Leadstorm for an increase of damage at the cost of not being able to move while shooting, and you can't stun targets. I will explain how this overclock works well later in the video. The Thunderhead is the second primary weapon the gunner can have, and you get it after completing the weapon assignment at level 10. It lacks more direct damage as compared to the minigun, but excels at splash damage. The splash damage can take out enemies that are closer together, which makes it good for swarms in tighter caverns. The gear modifications I suggest for the Thunderhead will be increased caliber rounds for increased damage, improved gas system for increased fire rate, loaded rounds for increased area damage, hardened rounds for armor breaking, and feedback loop for increased damage. The overclock I suggest for the Thunderhead will be the balanced overclock Carpet Bomber for increased area of effect, increased area of effect damage at the cost of less direct damage. The first secondary the gunner will have is the Bulldog Revolver. The Revolver does not have a lot of ammo but is very powerful. The ammo can be combated with mods if you wanted. The Revolver is powerful and is used for finishing off enemies such as Praetorian. The gear modifications I suggest for the Revolver would be Quickfire Ejector for increased reload speed, increased caliber rounds for increased damage, hollow point bullets for increased damage to weak points, high velocity rounds for increased damage, and neurotoxin coating for a chance to poison your target. The overclocks I suggest would be either Homebrew Powder for 80% to 140% damage output per shot, and 6-shooter for a 6-cylinder and faster fire rate, more ammo, at the cost of increased base spread and longer reload. The second pistol for the gunner is the Burst Fire Pistol, and this thing's not good. It's not as popular as the Bulldog, and I hate this thing. It eats through your ammo and honestly is not as viable of an option as the Bulldog. I was thinking of just skipping this gun altogether because it sucks. But this is a guide after all, so I will give you the gear modifications for it. I don't have any overclock recommendations because this thing's not good. So here we go. The gear modifications I recommend for the BRT7 Burst Fire Pistol will be high velocity rounds for increased damage, recoil dampener for less recoil, increased caliber rounds for increased damage, hollow point bullets for increased weak point damage, and longer burst for increased fire rate. The first gadget the gunner will have is the shield generator. The shield generator is great to use when being swarmed by enemies or when you need to revive a downed ally. Make sure you are using it when you are reviving an ally, as it will protect you and the downed ally. The gear modifications I recommend for the shield generator will be the improved projector for increased area of effect, fast charging capacitors for increased charge speed, and lasting effect, which will allow the shield's effect to last for a short time after exiting the shield. The second gadget every gunner will have is the Zipline gun. The Zipline is a great tool to use when farming for a Quarix, as the gunner can set up ziplines for all of his teammates so that they can get to higher places and ledges. The zipline is also fantastic for getting above ground where all of the enemies are. You can still be knocked down off of the zipline, however it gives you an advantageous place so you can kill the enemies without being harmed. The gear modifications I suggest for the Zipline will be reinforced anchor for increased range, reinforced cable for increased range, and increased motor traction for increased movement speed while on the Zipline. For the armor, I used these same gear modifications for each dwarf. I used improved generator for shield regen, overcharger for increased absorption of damage, reactive armor for increased resistance to explosions, and static charge. When your shield breaks, it will release a static discharge, stunning enemies. The first grenade the gunner will have is the sticky grenade. It will stick to any surface or creature and explode after a short time. The carried amount is 6, area damage of 130, effect radius of 4, impact fear factor of 250%, and explosion fear factor of 100%. The second grenade the gunner will have is the Incendiary grenade. It will explode on impact and cover a decent area with fire. The carried amount is 4, an effect radius of 430, with a duration of 6. The final grenade the gunner will have is the cluster grenade. When thrown, it will cause an explosion and then have a burst bomblet area of other explosions go off. The carried amount will be 4, the bomblets will be 9, the bomblet area damage will be 40, with an effect radius of 3.8, and have a stun chance of 50% with a 1.5 duration on the stun. So things to remember when playing the gunner: remember to use your shield to revive downed allies, or to use it when you're being swarmed by a lot of enemies and just need to get a break from the action. So I mentioned previously in this video the overclock lead storm for the minigun. This overclock works very well, as you can just hop on your zipline and move freely without that cost penalty of not being able to move while shooting. Be sure to use your ziplines in Dreadnought missions to get higher up so that you can have sustained firepower for you and your team. This also works well in mule missions, as when you're higher up you can cover the objective from above and have sustained damage on the enemies around you. As the gunner, you won't be necessarily focusing on Macteras or the smaller glyphids, but you will be able to take out the swarms much easier compared to other classes. The gunner might not be as appealing as compared to the scout or the engineer or even the driller, but the gunner plays its role in the team and is definitely needed on the team and plays its role fairly well. So there you guys have it. There's your quick and easy guide on how to use the gunner. Get out there, mine some minerals, and remember, if you don't rock and stone, you ain't going home. Please like and subscribe.